But I'm honored and privileged to be here, and hope that I can provide some information about the program that's here to us at the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. For those, and I don't know the longevity of the members that are seated around the table, so forgive me if I go over some information that many of you may be privy to, or it's a little redundant, but I do feel it's necessary to try and bring us all to a particular place to have a conversation as we move forward as it relates to this program. In 2018, there was a recognition that there needed to be some additional enforcement along the Jordan River, and several legislative representatives proposed and passed legislation that authorized the amount of money to come to the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands to address several issues. On the slide there, you see the river is actually broken into two sections as it relates to this particular revenue. One of the sections of the river is from essentially a lake to 5400 south, and those monies that were associated with that particular portion addressed recreation, area issues, environmental issues. There was a whole host of issues that were to be addressed with that. And then there was a second tranche and second designation of money that really covered the entire span of the Jordan River from lake to lake, and that addressed some law enforcement concerns. As the language indicates here, it said that these two separate tranches of money were to provide trail river parkway maintenance, invasive species removal and vegetation, emergency care and environmental education, up to 250 yards on either side of the Jordan River, which again is an interesting aspect. The program was designed to report to the appropriate public official all health, safety, and law enforcement concerns that the organization encounters as directed by the commission. I'm assuming, I hate to make this assumption, but I think that means this commission, if I'm not mistaken. Partnering also or contracting local law enforcement or certified peace officers to provide patrol, security, and law enforcement for the area. Again, from lake to lake, 250 yards on either side of the Jordan River corridor. As it was mentioned, when this money was first introduced, I believe that the initiative went off fairly well, but it did encounter a series of what I would consider to be disruptions, and there will be disruptions that are familiar to all of you. Number one was the COVID-19 situation that affected a lot of issues at many organizations. Another issue was the increasing homelessness that has been occurring along the river, specifically in many portions of the river, most pronounced in Salt Lake City and Back Valley and South Salt Lake, the kind of northern end of it. Also, some evolving social perspectives on law enforcement. And the reason I mention that is because there has been a period of time, those to room and to manage their own police departments will know that police work has gotten a little difficult over the last few years, and there were perceptions about how enforcement should occur and what maybe some of the limitations and how that might be approached. That has had an effect on this program and many other law enforcement programs as it relates to not only the Jordan River, but to the unsheltered and a variety of other circumstances. And this program, in my opinion, has not been immune to that. Also, there have been a few administrative changes within the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. Many of you know we have a new director, and when I say new, relatively new. Director Jamie Barnes came on board. She's made significant alterations within our division. She's engaged in a division-wide review of policies, procedures, programs, etc., and appointed a new leadership team. Mr. Starman, who you're all familiar with, is now the deputy in that organization, previously participated and has been heavily involved in this program over the years. So, and then of course my introduction to the process. My involvement in this particular program came on board in May of this year. When I came on board and was speaking to both the deputy and to the director, there was a conversation about reviewing this particular program and I to review its benefits, to maybe make some recommendations relative to revitalizing the initiative and ensuring its continued success. What I've done since coming on board in relation to this particular program is I met with administration to try and understand some historical perspectives. We want to move ahead and move forward, assuming all in. We reviewed the relative legislative action. As I mentioned, there are several House bills associated with this, including an expansion of the revenues that were initially allocated to this particular program. I've been gathering and reviewing our current legal agreements, and I'll explain to you more about how that works on the individual municipality basis here in just a few minutes. But we do have the legal agreements with many of the cities along the Georgia River corridor. I've also been doing physical observations and patrols on the entire length of the river. I've done those both in plainclothes, I've done them in uniform, and I've done them with the other agencies that were participating in trying to get a sense of what is occurring in that particular area, although it has some familiarity with it. Frankly, until you get down there and you're on the river on a full-time basis, you don't really get a full sense of what's happening. I've had discussions with law enforcement stakeholders. We've met with a number of commercial interests. These meetings, frankly, come impromptu oftentimes, as I'm down there on the river, but also we, like all of you, specifically Salt Lake City, and I'm sure West Valley and others are receiving, I think, a significant number of inquiries as related to the Jordan River, relative to some of the safety and other issues associated. So it's kind of all encompassing. And informal communication with residents. Again, you can't really help it as you're down there, you're moving around, you get talking to a lot of folks that live and recreate, move around on the corridor, and that's been, I think, a very important piece too. The other thing is looking at the budget analysis. We'll get into that here in just a few minutes. And I wouldn't really call it an analysis at this point. I would say it's a budget review, looking at some of the documentation we do have, and then reviewing some of the available program statistics, which I will share with you. This graph, which is not exactly high tech, and there's some reasons for that. I mentioned to you that the monies were initially allocated in a combined fashion. For the first 2 years of the program, it is difficult for me to identify the specific revenues associated with enforcement only. That's not an indictment of the process or anything of the kind. It's just the nature of that particular process has evolved, I think, over the years, and that it brought some clarity to it in the year 2020. In 2020, funds that were allocated directly to law enforcement were expended at 100% of the allocated rate. So times particularly a little bit better about the process that goes on in terms of how those decisions, in terms of how much money is allocated to law enforcement occur. But we spent 100%. In 2021, 80% was expended. And in 2022, 40%. And then it began to be up in 2023 and 24. The reason there is no graph is because our fiscal year, as you all know, begins in July. So rather than put a figure in there, I felt it was important to leave that open. In total, I can identify $730,000 over the course of those 4 years, excluding the current appropriation or the current allocation in 2024. Specifically, now, too busy, formative, so if you need clarification there would be what I'm trying to do here, say per year. And my agency that is actively participating in this particular program, their invoices for their services. A few of the, I think there's some handouts here. You can see that not all of the municipalities that have riverfront jurisdictions participate. That may simply be a function of us not communicating with them and making them aware of the availability of these funds. So please don't read into that. But those agencies that do participate in it, we have what I would consider to be quite good participation. Murray's been quite active, as you can see. Salt Lake City is, of course, our major utilizer of these revenues. And you can see that diminishment in the invoices that occurred there. I think that is a function of some of the items I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, but that's theoretical. Saratoga Springs, and I've heard them all, and here there's leadership in that city. We've had exceptional, even though their graph is relatively small in comparison, we have exceptional participation in Saratoga Springs. They utilize these monies along a lake and on their river corridor there, and they do a great job. We deal with it quite a bit. Unified Police participated, encompassing Taylorsville at the time there, we're moving forward to track that out moving forward, make sure we identify that with Jordan. And then West Valley, drawing the agency out in particular, but West Valley has really been a very nice incremental sustained approach to this. And we've seen some really good participation within, and I think it's very effective approach to this. How does the program really work? Essentially, it's managed what we refer to as secondary employment opportunity. What that means is all of you that manage police departments, and some that don't, almost every law enforcement agency in the state allows their officers to engage in secondary law enforcement or security employment with a variety of interests. For instance, a hospital that may have a significant amount of security concerns in the jurisdiction can contact a local police department, their and say, gee, can we pay for extra officers to come stay at this hospital at particular times and provide additional security with the authorization of that municipality? They then are allowed to go into that hospital and work as secondary employment security officers. They generally wear the uniforms of the agency that they are employed by. They have to follow the policies, procedures, supervision, and there is almost always a provision that if conflict in terms of time, let's say that a particular city has major, that officer may be called to leave that secondary employment and go respond to these other issues. That's exactly how this particular program is administered. What we do is we communicate with municipalities. If they want to participate, we engage in an MOU or a contract with them, defining what some of our provisions are, including how the payments will be made and the documentation that they will need to be required to maintain so that we can take ourselves to audits, etc. Once that's done, officers deploy to the river in the areas that really they define. So an officer would come on duty, and I'll go through some of the statistics here in a minute. He might work the shift from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. and now he's still in the municipality. He decides he wants to earn some extra money. He coordinates with his agency secondary employment coordinator, and he or she goes down on the river and then clocks in as a contract law enforcement officer utilizing monies that are flowing in through from the 40 fire state land. In turn, then, that officer, after he works his or her shift, he sends in his time to the municipality, and the municipality logs it, and will send us an invoice on a quarterly basis. And in addition to that, the officer is required to do some documentation about his or her activities during the period of time that he or she is on the river. And I'll go over those in just a few minutes. As you can see, we have you might even see specifically it's more representative craft, but if you get the idea, we have a lot of agencies that are along the shore of the river. This graph, again, we tried to provide something that's beneficial. It's a little skewed because the other statistics on here look anemic, but it's only because the first is so large. The number of public contacts that we have recorded over the duration of this program, I drew statistics from November 6, 2018 to November 30 of this year. They have made 72,000 public contacts, almost 73,000 public contacts. That's a lot of contacts. I think the next graph is a little bit more demonstrative. What I did was I extrapolated the statistics and put them in a monthly basis. And I want to caution you that first of all, I think the monthly stats are pretty good. But remember too that this is aggregated. In other words, this is for the entire year. I know that officers tend to work more in summer, weather, it's just the way it is. And so really these statistics are pretty impressive if you look at it in this in the aggregated sense. What it refers to is that we're making about 1,100, 1,200 public contacts every month on the river border. Officers are issuing 50 warnings. Now, warnings are important because what we try and do is we emphasize an educational approach rather than punitive enforcement, criminal justice interdiction or interjection. We know that can have an adverse effect on some of those children populations by continuing to just write citations after citations to our courts. Warnings can be effective and allows us also to making determinations about some of the illegal camping issues. We can document that they've been warned, we can provide a 24-hour warning to them about their location, so 50 warnings a month, not shabby. Citations, 21 a month. We look through some of these citations, they're meaningful. They incorporate everything from some wildlife violations, which I was a little shocked about because right now we don't have wildlife resource officers on the river, but it's interesting to me that we're actually seeing some of that. And then we see a whole host of other violations that are. One of the statistics that really jumped out to me was felony arrests. 20 felony arrests is significant. Now, if you look at these, the majority of these are associated with warrant service. What that means is that an officer down on the river border or somebody circumstances that they either require the individual to often have determined the individual has health standing felony warrant, that would be identified in the statistics of the felony warrant. There are also instances where felonious activity is occurring in and around the river. And I think we all understand that's the reality. The community arrest are indicated relatively month tree, and then the log entries. What's this mean? As the officers go out with their shift, in addition to putting in statistics about what their activity is, they will also do an entry where they define or describe things and circumstances that they're seeing on the river. Standard log entry would be saw, camped at, B Bravo 41. I think many of you know that the river is divided in portions into a kind of an American milepost marker situation. So oftentimes the officers will refer to it and say, I see a camp of Bravo 41. I ran into Joe Schmo, who's down on the river an awful lot, etc. So we see those kinds of log entries. And 21 a month is substantial. I have the fun. I ran the database down 275 pages of log entries that come from these. Some of these guys are very voluminous as it relates to their log entries. Others are not. This is kind of an interesting. Pardon me. I think this is an interesting. I might analyze law enforcement programs. I like to look and see what our coverage is. These are telling in a number of ways. As I pull the start times and the days worked out of the database, which again, we'll emphasize, we will really control. These are individuals essentially self-employed. As I looked at that, this is kind of a remarkable disbursement of those shifts, which can vary, vary across many days. There isn't really a strong reboot. I think that this is representative of the fact that officers work a variety of shifts, and therefore they're working at secondary shifts. The association boundary of their days off. We're getting a very diverse approach to the days that they're on shift. The same thing in terms of start times. What this represents is all of what we have to do is indicate when they actually got out and started working in the river. They entered those into a database. Here's what it shows. We have a significant spike of officers who will go down and start their shifts at 6 a.m., which I think is very appropriate. We have another significant number at 8 a.m., another one at noon, and another one at 4. And then as it tapers off throughout the evening, you can understand it's going to the disbursement of the start times is interesting, I think. This shift or this statistic I really need to clarify. It shows here that we are funding 35 shifts a month. That is skewed. What I did, based on the way the database works, I took the total number of entries. The problem with that is I can have sometimes 4 or 5 entries in a day because some guys enter their work time as an individual officer. And also sometimes they enter it as a partner teams. Sometimes you'll have 2 names in one line, if that makes sense. So I would have this as why I have a little asterisk with it. What I can tell you is we have 2,264 log entries that equates to 35 shifts a month. My opinion is that that's not necessarily representative. I don't think we have personnel every single day of the month. I think there are opportunities for improvement in the program. discuss this with our leadership, and we want to be clear that our goal is to work with this commission, with every municipality that we've been fortunate to work with to date, and also encourage and involve any other municipalities that would like to participate. One of the things I think we need to do is to refine the goals and objectives of this particular program. And that means looking back at the legislative language and identifying what do we really want these officers doing down there on the river. I mentioned to you right now, there's some bad thing, but they're predominantly operating autonomously or in many instances based on the needs and approaches of their respective municipality, which is great. But it doesn't necessarily give us a global understanding of the issues that affect what really is a singular band of jurisdiction between the two lakes. I think we need to align our approaches and our perspectives. And I'm speaking specifically here about the unsheltered and what that's going to be highly political, emotional, we deep into that. I think that's a conversation the communities have to ask is how are we going to address that? The fact of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, when any municipality approaches the unsheltered and moves them, often they simply go to another area. You know that. The question has to be is, are we viewing that? Are we documenting it? How are we approaching that with sensitivity and with logic? There does need to be, in my opinion, more centralized coordination, and that doesn't mean do as we say. It does mean that, and I will take the responsibility for sure. It means that we have to take a greater role. I have to take a greater role in understanding specifically what's occurring and being able to report that back to you and to the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Land. I see that we serve two masters in that particular approach. Developing a common language, and here's an example of this. I think we find this often in law enforcement. When I looked at the log entries, what is the definition of a camp? When somebody says I saw a camp, that can mean a guy in a sleeping bag down by the river. To others, it could mean 30 individual habitations with a tarp over top, with fire fish. You get my gist there. And so I think what we have to say is if we're going to report back with any clarity in terms of the global needs of all of the institutions that are looking at that, we have to come back with some empirical and validated information from our patrols. These men and women, I hope, can be some eyes and ears for many of the ongoing initiatives. The point in time, consensus is extremely important. But imagine we can have real-time data coming out of the joint conversation about what's actually happening and what are the push points and the pull points that are occurring externally that affect that. Because we know that they individuals oftentimes are pressured or by choice to hit up on the river corridor. So I think we need to really understand that. Implement uniform records. This is frustrating. Over the course of the duration of this program, we've actually used and continue to use, and we can get in and readdress it. We're using 3 separate reporting mechanisms, and that's just, as you all know, that's problematic. What we need to do is to streamline that. I think we're going to move towards using Smart GIS. We're familiar with this program called Survey 123. It allows us to disseminate it on the phone to every officer. We feed the information back in a uniform way, validate the actual geolocations that these inputs are coming in, etc. I think it's a good opportunity. And we need to do a better job of communicating with respective municipalities in terms of the crime reports that are occurring on that. To take a look at those, right? We can't look back. A lot of good work going on down there, but we need to understand what's happening and how we can assist. And then I think very importantly, I need to enhance both our internal communication and our external communication. I think all of you came here not just to sit in the meeting, but to have meaningful, realistic information and to input your municipality, your individual concerns and questions based on that information. And I think that is our primary job. I think this is the legislature. I and this money to
far away. Speaker. Microphone.
And so commit to you here today that we anticipate doing that and are excited to do that and are proud to do this. There are alternative approaches to how we are doing law enforcement down along the river. And I would just throw this out as a little bit of a teaser because I think those conversations need to go on in the future. I'm sort of prepared today to outline a whole series of alternatives. I think the most important thing to understand is there's always more than one way to skin a cat. And what we see is there's a lot of agencies doing a lot of good work. And frankly, there are things that are not working that we need to look at and be willing to readdress. And I think it's a fair statement in all that we do in both law enforcement and government. The next steps that I will specifically take before I come back to this body and to my administration is I'm going to clarify the available revenues. I'm going to meet with the sworn Joe River Commission, staff member Morgan, who participates and assists in that. I want to figure out specifically how that looks and what you feel comfortable is the ongoing applications associated with that. And that's important to understand so we know how we can. We are going to be redistributing these contracts and MOUs with respective cities. Part of the problem we have is these contracts are not uniform, and they also have non-aligned due dates, which I think from a sheer logistics perspective is difficult. In other words, we like them all to be issued on the day, due on another day, have the same language, the same issues relative to reporting, invoice, etc. And I think the reason that occurred, you can all appreciate this, is agencies came on individual agreements were developed and that just happens. So now we know we can go back and readdress that. The other thing I think is very critical, I hope to involve some of the parties in this room within this, and I'd love to hear from you. I think it's imperative that we provide pre-deployment training in the men and women that are down on this river. I, in law enforcement for an hour and a half that I have been, you know, a lot of times you get deployed, you don't know what you're supposed to do. And that's, it's not again an indictment, it's not, but you're like, okay, I'm here, now what? And this is a very complicated issue. Am I supposed to address when people, you know, kill a bird? Am I supposed to, what's happening? Am I supposed to look for effluent is running obviously out of a canal and going into the Jordan River? And if so, how do I report it? What services are available for me to recommend and to provide to individuals that I encounter? What is the global thought process as it relates to OHV issues on the trail? I can tell you that's becoming a real serious point of contention. People are going to ride motorcycles and UTVs. Many people think it is, shall we say, they're right. It's hazardous, it's problematic, it has to be addressed globally. So these are many other things I think I'd like to open up to questions, comments, suggestions, but more importantly, the input. And please just know that the Division of Forestry Fire has here to serve the commission and more importantly, to the lawyer community.
Thank you so much. Let's give him a hand. Sorry. Anybody have any questions? I have like a million questions that came out of this, but we'll entertain some short questions.
I just wanted to ask, are you using the myjordanriver.org mobile website for, you know, you mentioned some of these issues, maybe it would be really easy just to have them have this quick entry for things that are outside of, you know, your scope.
No, the answer to that is we are not, and the reason for it is I'm not a technical wizard, but the combining that via the API or technical fusion of some of the data, I think we need to address. Also, some of the law enforcement data is protected, and so we have to be a little cognizant about what data we release in MOS. All of you are familiar with that. And so for some of those reasons, we're trying to keep that law enforcement data somewhat isolated or contained. Doesn't mean it can't be available to be in an appropriate format. Yeah, that's
If you don't mind, there's just one slide out there that I wanted to just add a little bit of information. You notice there were maybe some years where we didn't use our whole allocation. What was allocated to law enforcement, and I just wanted to clarify, that we don't turn that into that budget, and we utilize that for other, objectives we like to funding. So we're able to reallocate that to other uses on the river. And we're kind of in the weeds of like how many officers sign up for each shifts and how much the cities participate, so it's hard to say, going to, that's 100% was allocated for law enforcement. And I think that's part of the challenge that we're just trying to address there. We're really lucky to have just institutional knowledge, because I think as we got stood up, there's obviously things to improve. And I think just the right guy to, figure out how to move this to the next phase of, effectiveness of the river. So I think will be appreciated more than move where the work of everybody is more than initiated.
And before you turn, somebody's asking on the chat, if you could clarify your, the number up there, it looks like there's an extra digit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, it's 801-834 dash. That's supposed to be 7610. Apologies, didn't guess that.
The zero in the middle is the dash.
Yes, ma'am.
Got it, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'd just like to request that as you work with these officers, that there is some standardization of the type of vehicle they will use down in the river. I have noticed in the Riverton Bloodville area, I don't know which police force it is, but they're using the ATV vehicles to cruise up and down the trail, and they're not using the common courtesy of moving to the side when they're walkers or bikers. So I think that should be an important part of the training, and I think it's important residents see an ATV on the trail, and they assume, okay, it's open for business.
The next point, ma'am. Thank you.
Is there enough funding for cities to hire a full-time person to patrol the river instead of waiting for volunteers?
It's a great question, Mayor, and let me, I will say this, that my experience is that the secondary employment approach has some drawbacks. It does have one significant advantage, and that is when one starts analyzing full-time employees with their benefit load, you can oftentimes get more actual coverage on a secondary or an overtime shift, as you would know. I think perhaps we have to do a mirror in the process. I think we're in the maybe there's much of this year. Looks like we're going to be fortunate enough to get some additional full-time folks as well, which we're going to apply in these issues. But I would love to see some conversation on how you're right, rather than have it be voluntary, we come together and say, who's all going to these shifts? And I think we have some ideas about that. I'd love to talk with your representatives about that, and because I think you're dead on. The idea of, hey, just come as you can. You get a mix of officers, you get a mix of approaches, it's not a bad thing, but I hear you loud and clear.
Is there any? Go ahead.
I'm not sure you can answer this one, but the graffiti under the underpasses that are mostly state roads. Is that a UDOT issue, or is that reported, or how do they go with that?
That's a great question. The short answer is I don't. And it has to do with these jurisdictional issues. Both municipalities have graffiti abatement programs that are very effective. And so what tends to happen is as they become aware of it, the goal objective is to remove that as quickly as possible, because number one, it's ugly, and number two, it is to remove more issues. I would say this about that. That is an issue that I think we should address in terms of this coordination, because if we see it, we should refer to the respective municipality. We should get on that. Too much time to spend about who owns which wreck. I think maybe it's just, hey, let's go take it off the wreck. And I'm not being facetious here, but I'm concerned.
I'll just add quickly that, I think that there's an opportunity for cities to see this data regularly, because I know that if there's issues on the river that the city's made aware of, I think we can be more proactive about it. And even just some of the repeat, we're aware, in Mill Creek, we're aware of where camps like to pop up over and over again. It's unclear whether it's the same people, but just having the knowledge of, we need to have a social worker down there, or there's graffiti somewhere that's new, or, we keep seeing the same person on an ATV riding down this stretch at this time of day. those type of things are really helpful. I think that, just the coordination of data and, the logs even would be really helpful to cities. Even if they don't participate, I think there's some good overlap in trying to, make the Jordan River Trail a nice place to be.
Completely agree, the intelligence value of that, some people they take it as a negative term. If you have a spate of crime, specifically vehicle burglaries, residential burglaries, and we know there are camps in the area, that is imperative that be transmitted to respective jurisdictions, because oftentimes, I hate to, you hate to paint with too broad a brush, but oftentimes if there's a large active, shifted population nearby, then there'll often be a focus of some of this activity, and if we get it resolved, or at least be aware of it, local agencies, a lot of times folks don't even know. How many times we go to the grocery store and they set the wall out, knowing that there's 100 people living on the wall behind you. So awareness is critical. Thank you.
We need to wrap up. Just one quick kind of final thought from the commission standpoint. The power of the Jordan River Commission is the partnership. I had a chance last evening to meet with the chief captain in the Salt Lake City PD. I think it's Captain Lopez, if I remember right. And we were talking about some of the enforcement issues in Salt Lake City, because the number of individuals camping and the active drug use that's going on in some of those campsites is really problematic for a lot of users there, trail users and recreationists. One of the things that came up was a question from the police department. Can they trim back some of that dense vegetation? A lot of that vegetation is within the riparian corridor. As into our discussions about riparian corridors and the health of the vegetation around the river, but really dense vegetation does create problematic issues for monitoring campsites and some of the illegal activity that's going on. And so, I think one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot, and I've had a couple of conversations in the last couple of weeks with Jim, is looking at ways that we can better coordinate and cooperate on some of these, get back to the point where we're meeting with all of the law enforcement agencies routinely, having them express what they're saying, using the opportunities that Ray Robinson brings to us now with vegetation management, to look at how we manage vegetation for crime prevention through environmental design in a way that doesn't disrupt the beneficial things around the vegetation, which is habitat and beautification and all of those things. So there's a lot of complicated issues that are interrelated, and we want to look at ways that we can use the commission to leverage and make sure that we're coordinating these efforts so that they're definitely consistently, because we have so many jurisdictions and everybody has their own staff and their own resources and different divisions working on different pieces of it. We want to make sure that we're doing that in a real coordinated way. So, but Jim, thank you for being here and for your thoughtful approach to how we maybe look at how we best utilize this program in the future. I think we're really interested in how we continue to evolve it.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Good day.
Thank you.